The alarm on Ethan Walker's phone went off at 6:12 a.m., the same tinny chime that had dragged him out of bed every weekday for the past 2 years. He reached out with a heavy, uncoordinated hand and fumbled for the screen, knocking over the half-empty glass of water on his nightstand. Water spilled across the wood, soaking a stack of unpaid utility bills and a wrinkled photo of a smiling woman holding a baby. Great, he muttered, already exhausted before the day had even begun. From the next room came a small, sleepy voice. Daddy, are we late again? Ethan rubbed his face, his stubble rough against tired skin. Not yet, kiddo. We're just getting started. He pushed himself out of bed and hurried down the narrow hallway of their modest Connecticut townhouse. The place was clean but felt permanently unfinished, like a home that never quite recovered from something being taken out of it. Lily stood in the kitchen in her oversized pink hoodie, backpack already on, hair half brushed and sticking out in every direction. Her blue eyes, bright and alert despite the early hour, watched him with the calm, patient disappointment of a child who had learned to expect chaos. You promised you wouldn't forget my field trip form, she said, holding out a crumpled piece of paper. Ethan froze, his heart sank. I didn't forget, he lied badly, then glanced at the cluttered counter. Coffee mug, empty cereal bowl, a pile of mail, no field trip form. Lily sighed, not angry, just resigned. It's okay. I wrote your name for you. He took the paper, throat tight. You shouldn't have to do that. But you always forget, she said gently, like she was talking to someone much older than 8. Ethan forced a smile and scribbled his signature. Inside, guilt pressed against his ribs like something heavy and unmovable. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. 2 years ago, he'd been a dependable, detail-oriented husband, a focused, organized man. Now he was a scattered, chronically late widower, barely holding it together with caffeine and apologies. His wife Hannah had died suddenly from a brain aneurysm. No warning, no goodbye. One morning she was laughing in the kitchen, teasing him about burning the toast. By that evening, she was gone. Ethan hadn't recovered. He had just continued. They rushed out the door, Lily hopping down the front steps while Ethan locked up, already feeling the familiar panic of being behind schedule. Traffic was brutal. Red lights stretched endlessly. His phone buzzed with a calendar alert. Interview, 9 a.m. Dad, are you sweating? Lily asked from the back seat. Just a little, he said, gripping the steering wheel. It's motivational sweat. She didn't laugh, but she smiled. He dropped her off at school with a kiss on her forehead. I'll be on time today, he promised. She nodded, though they both knew promises had become unreliable things. Pinnacle Marketing sat in a modest brick building downtown. No glass towers, no flashy logos, just a quiet company trying to survive in a loud industry. Ethan arrived 20 minutes late. The receptionist looked up with a polite, sympathetic expression. Mr. Walker, Ms. Miller's waiting for you. Of course she is, he muttered, straightening his rumpled shirt as he hurried down the hallway. Grace Miller was nothing like he expected. He'd imagined a sharp-edged corporate executive in a power suit. Instead, the woman who stood when he entered had warm brown eyes, soft curls pulled into a loose bun, and a navy blazer that looked more practical than intimidating. Mr. Walker, she said kindly, I'm so sorry I kept you waiting. Mornings can get away from you. He blinked. They really can. She gestured for him to sit. I saw on your resume that you're a single father. Yes, ma'am. My sister's one too, she said. So I know how unpredictable life can be when you're trying to get a kid to school and still show up for the world. Something loosened in his chest. They talked about marketing strategy, client retention, branding, but also about work-life balance, about flexibility, about what it meant to actually be present for your family. Grace listened in a way that felt rare, thoughtful, grounded, genuine. When the interview ended, she smiled. Ethan, I'd like to offer you the position. Just like that. You don't even want to think about it? He asked, stunned. I already have, she replied. You have experience, perspective, and something this company needs, a human heart. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt a flicker of something dangerously close to hope. That night, he picked Lily up on time. She noticed. You got the job, didn't you? She asked, buckling her seatbelt. He smiled. Yeah, I did. Good, she said softly. Maybe now you won't look so sad all the time. Ethan swallowed. He didn't know it yet, but the quiet woman with the warm eyes was about to change everything. Ethan Walker started to realize something was different about Pinnacle Marketing during his first full week on the job. At exactly 4:45 p.m. every afternoon, his computer would ping with a reminder Grace Miller had personally set for him: pick up Lily. At first, he thought it was a coincidence. By the third day, he understood it wasn't. Family first, Ethan, Grace said one afternoon when he looked up, startled by the alert. The campaign can wait. Your daughter can't. Those words landed deeper than she probably realized. For the first time since Hannah died, Ethan stopped feeling like he was constantly choosing between being a good employee and a good father. At Pinnacle, he was allowed to be both. Lily noticed the change too. He was home for dinner. He showed up to her school concert. He didn't rush her through bedtime stories anymore. And slowly, without trying, Grace became part of their routine. Every morning, a coffee appeared on Ethan's desk. Medium roast, a splash of cream, no sugar, exactly how he liked it. He never remembered telling her. How do you always get this right? He asked one day, holding up the cup. Grace shrugged with a gentle smile. Some people are worth paying attention to. Lily met Grace a week later when Ethan had to bring her to the office after school because the babysitter canceled. He expected chaos. Instead, Grace had already set up a little corner of her office with coloring pencils and a stack of paper. You must be Lily, she said warmly, kneeling down to her eye level. Your dad talks about you like you're the most important client he has. Lily liked her instantly. You don't smell like office, Lily declared. You smell like flowers. Grace laughed. I'll take that as a compliment. From that day on, Lily would ask, Is Miss Grace working today? With a hopeful little smile. Ethan noticed things. He just didn't understand them yet. Grace remembered Lily's soccer schedule. Grace knew Lily hated pickles on her burgers. Grace sent Ethan home early when Lily had a fever, personally telling him, I'll cover the meeting. To Ethan, it felt like kindness. To everyone else, it was something more. They ate lunch together often, supposedly to talk about campaigns, though the conversation usually drifted into stories about childhoods, favorite books, and how grief could sneak up on you when you least expected it. You don't have to be strong all the time, Grace told him once, her voice soft but steady. You're allowed to be tired. Ethan didn't know how to respond to that. No one had said those words to him in 2 years. At home, Lily watched everything. Miss Grace likes you, she said one evening, swinging her legs as Ethan tied her shoes. She's just nice, he replied. She looks at you like you're a puppy she wants to keep, Lily said. He laughed. You're ridiculous. But later, alone in the kitchen, he found himself thinking about the way Grace smiled when he walked into a room. About how she always sat just a little too close. About how quiet the office felt when she wasn't there. Grace, meanwhile, was doing her best not to cross a line. She respected Ethan's grief. She saw his wedding ring. She knew his heart was still bruised and fragile. So instead of rushing him, she stayed. Instead of demanding, she waited. And sometimes, waiting was the hardest part. One Saturday, Grace invited the entire team over for a casual backyard barbecue. She made sure there were kid-friendly drinks just for Lily and a small inflatable pool waiting when they arrived. You thought of everything, Ethan said, watching Lily laugh as she splashed. Grace smiled, but there was something deeper behind it. Some things deserve effort. As the sun set and the team slowly drifted home, Lily fell asleep on a patio chair, wrapped in a towel. Ethan and Grace sat side by side in the soft glow of string lights. Do you ever think about dating again? Grace asked quietly. Ethan stared at the ground. I don't know. I loved Hannah so much. Loving someone else feels wrong. Grace nodded, though it hurt. Love doesn't disappear just because someone is gone. Ethan didn't answer. As he carried Lily to the car, he felt it again. That strange feeling that something important was happening right in front of him. But he didn't see it yet, and Grace kept waiting. By the time autumn rolled into Connecticut, Ethan Walker had settled into something that almost looked like a normal life. Mornings were still rushed, but they were less chaotic. Lily was doing well in school, and work. Work finally felt steady. And then there was Grace. She was everywhere in his days, woven so seamlessly into his routine that he barely noticed how essential she had become. She brought him coffee every morning. She stopped by his office just to ask how Lily's spelling test went. She remembered that he hated fluorescent lights and replaced the bulb above his desk with a warmer one. To Ethan, these were just kind gestures. To everyone else, they were loud. Tom from accounting leaned over one afternoon and whispered, So, when are you two going to admit it? Admit what? Ethan asked. That you and Grace are basically a married couple without the paperwork. Ethan laughed it off, but the words stuck with him longer than he liked. At home, Lily saw it even more clearly. Miss Grace makes you smile like Mom used to, she said one night while brushing her teeth. Ethan froze. That's not fair. It is, Lily replied calmly. You don't look sad when she's around. He didn't know how to argue with that. Grace kept trying to hold the line, but it was getting harder. She found herself lingering in Ethan's doorway, touching his arm when she spoke, making excuses to work late when she knew Lily was staying with Ethan's parents. Every small moment felt charged with something neither of them was brave enough to name. Then came Valentine's Day. Ethan arrived at his desk to find a simple vase of red roses with no card. He asked around the office, assuming it was a mistake. Grace nearly spilled her coffee. Secret admirer, Tom teased. Probably a mix-up, Ethan said, oblivious. Grace smiled tightly, pretending it didn't sting. Later that week, Lily and Ethan both caught the flu. Grace showed up at their door with soup, medicine, and a stack of movies. You didn't have to do this, Ethan said weakly. I wanted to, she replied. She stayed until Lily fell asleep, then quietly washed dishes while Ethan watched, feeling something strange and heavy in his chest. This didn't feel like just a boss being kind. But he still didn't say anything. The night before a major client pitch, Ethan stayed late at the office, stressed and exhausted. Grace brought him homemade pasta and sat beside him, sharing stories and laughter in the empty building. For a moment, the space between them disappeared. Ethan almost said something. Almost. His phone buzzed with a message from Lily, and the moment broke. Grace left without another word. At home that night, Lily finally spoke the truth he had been avoiding. Dad, she said softly, you're scared to be happy. He looked at her, startled. You don't want to love Miss Grace because you think Mom would be mad, Lily continued. But Mom loved you. She wouldn't want you to be lonely. Ethan felt tears burn his eyes. For the first time, he wondered if the greatest thing he was afraid of wasn't losing Grace, but letting himself need her. The company retreat arrived on a chilly Friday afternoon in early November, just as the last leaves were clinging stubbornly to the trees. Pinnacle Marketing had booked a lakeside lodge tucked between pine-covered hills, the kind of place that looked like it belonged in a postcard. Ethan almost didn't go, but Lily had insisted. You should, she said, stuffing his best sweater into his bag. Miss Grace will be there. He didn't argue. When Ethan arrived, Grace was already coordinating staff, clipboard in hand, hair loose around her shoulders in a way he wasn't used to seeing. She looked softer, warmer, almost vulnerable. Cabin 7, she said, handing him a key. It's quieter over there. Thank you, he replied, holding her gaze a second too long. The welcome dinner was filled with laughter and clinking glasses, but Ethan found himself watching Grace more than listening to anyone else. The way she smiled when she talked, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. They sat beside each other, sharing stories that drifted from work into memories of childhood and lost dreams. My wife loved places like this, Ethan admitted quietly. Somewhere peaceful, somewhere safe. Grace listened, eyes kind and steady. She sounds wonderful. She was. After dinner, most of the team headed to the lodge bar. Grace glanced toward the darkening lake. Do you want to take a walk? Ethan nodded. They walked along the shoreline in silence, the moon reflecting off the water like scattered silver. The air smelled like pine and cold earth. How's Lily doing? Grace asked. She's growing up too fast, he smiled. She thinks she knows everything. Smart girl. She thinks I should start dating again. Grace stopped walking. And what do you think? She asked softly. Ethan stared at the lake. I think I've been hiding. I loved Hannah so much that I was afraid loving anyone else would somehow betray her. Grace swallowed. And now? And now I realize I've been lonely, and that there's someone in my life who makes me feel less broken. Grace's breath caught. Ethan, I don't know how to say this without sounding foolish, he continued, but I care about you, more than I should, and if you don't feel the same, I understand. Grace didn't let him finish. She leaned forward and kissed him, gently at first, then with the weight of 2 years of unspoken longing. When they pulled apart, her eyes were shining. I've been waiting for you to see me. I'm sorry it took so long, he whispered. They stayed by the lake, talking, laughing, sharing stories until the cold drove them back inside. For the first time in years, Ethan felt like his heart was finally waking up. The rest of the retreat passed in a strange, glowing haze. Ethan and Grace moved through meetings and meals with secret smiles, careful glances, and a quiet electricity that followed them everywhere. They hadn't told anyone yet, not because they were ashamed, but because it felt too new, too precious to hand over to office gossip. They wanted just a little more time. By the final morning, the entire team gathered in the main conference room of the lodge for the closing strategy session. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, reflecting off flip charts and laptops. Coffee cups lined the long table. It felt serious again, like real work had finally caught up to the magic of the weekend. Ethan stood at the front of the room, remote in hand, walking everyone through his presentation. His voice was confident, steady, the kind of voice he hadn't had in years. And finally, he said, clicking to the last slide, this approach won't just increase our market share. It will position Pinnacle as a brand built on trust, consistency, and emotional connection with our customers. I love you, you idiot. The words sliced cleanly through the room. Silence dropped like a curtain. Ethan turned slowly. Grace was standing at the head of the table, both hands pressed to her mouth, her face pale and shocked. Like the words had escaped before she could stop them. 20 pairs of eyes jumped back and forth between them. I, I'm so sorry, Grace stammered. That wasn't, please, go on, Ethan. But he couldn't go on. His heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might break free from his chest. He set the remote down. Then he walked across the room. People held their breath as he stopped in front of her and took her hands in his. I love you too, Ethan said, loud enough for everyone to hear. And yes, I am an idiot, the biggest one in this room, because you've been standing right in front of me for 2 years, and I was too afraid to see you. Grace's eyes filled with tears. And I'm done being afraid. He leaned down and kissed her. Applause exploded around them. Someone let out a wolf whistle. Tom from accounting pumped his fist like he just won a championship game. I told you it would happen at the retreat, he shouted, collecting cash from 2 stunned coworkers. Grace buried her face against Ethan's chest, laughing and crying at the same time. I can't believe I did that. I'm glad you did, Ethan whispered. I might have taken another year otherwise. Later that afternoon, when the team was dispersing, Lily ran into the room with Ethan's parents close behind. Daddy, she called. Grandma said you had a big moment. Ethan scooped her up. You have no idea. Grace knelt in front of her. So, your dad and I are kind of together now. Lily grinned. Finally. Grace laughed, surprised. You're okay with that? Lily studied her seriously. Do you make my dad happy? Grace looked at Ethan. I try to. Then it's fine, Lily declared. Also, you remember I hate pickles, so you're already better than him. Hey, Ethan protested, smiling. And for the first time in years, it felt like everything was falling into place. The weeks after the retreat felt like the start of a completely new season in Ethan Walker's life. At the office, things were different. Not awkward, just warmer, lighter. Grace and Ethan kept things professional, but the secret smiles were gone now. There was no more hiding, no more pretending. Everyone knew. Tom from accounting even put a fake sign on Ethan's door that read, Office Romance Survivor. Grace eventually shifted into a different executive role to avoid any conflict of interest. But nothing about their connection changed. If anything, it grew stronger, steady, grounded, and quietly powerful. The biggest change, though, happened at home. Grace didn't try to replace Hannah. She didn't erase the past, she respected it. When Ethan had hard days, when a song on the radio suddenly knocked the breath out of him, or when Lily looked so much like her mother that it made his chest ache, Grace didn't push those feelings away. She sat with him in them. That's what made her different. Lily, too, slowly let Grace into her world. They did homework together. They baked cookies. They argued about which Disney movie was the best. And one night, after Grace tucked Lily into bed, Lily whispered, I think Mom would like you. Grace cried in the hallway afterward. A year later, Ethan proposed in their small, messy kitchen. No grand setup, no dramatic music, just 2 people standing over a sink full of dishes when he suddenly realized he never wanted to come home to anyone else. Marry me, he said, holding out a ring Lily had helped pick. Grace said yes through tears and laughter. They were married the following spring, Lily as their flower girl, beaming like she was the most important person in the world, because she was. Years passed. Life wasn't perfect. They argued. They struggled. They juggled work and parenting and exhaustion, but they faced it together. And every night when Ethan lay beside Grace, he felt something he once thought he'd lost forever. Peace. So let me ask you something. Have you ever missed the signs? Have you ever let fear talk you out of happiness? Because sometimes the person who loves you most isn't far away. They're standing right in front of you, bringing you coffee, remembering the small things, waiting for you to finally see them. Don't wait as long as Ethan did. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us for more heartfelt stories about love, family, and second chances. Your next favorite story is just one click away.